Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody who is already up with me here, all the panelists. I'm going to introduce them in a second, but give me half a minute. Welcome to all to one of the issues that is core to human challenges these days, and it seems to be superseded at present by the war against the Ukraine and the many conflicts in other parts of the world, by the struggle to keep multilateralism strong in face of growing dictatorial and unilateral acting regimes, by the big headlines on climate change and the loss of biodiversity, which inherently determine how and whether humanity can survive. And yet they are also very closely related to agriculture and how we do agriculture. Yet our issue is part of the set of answers, if done correctly, not just producing more and better food, ideally reducing hunger and feeding a growing world population, but by using tech for good. As the claim goes, digital transformation does hold enormous potential to drive positive change. All of us know the buzzwords: precision farming, precision irrigation, climate smart, big data, AI, better managed and more shock-resistant supply chains, etc. We're going to hear about that in a moment. And let me say thank you very much for all of the participants here to be here on location in Berlin. So let me introduce them and to be on the safe side in alphabetical order. So Inbal Becker-Richev is director of NASA Harvest, University of Maryland and University of Strasbourg in the past. Earth data for informed agricultural decisions is the punchline. We're going to be talking about that in a moment. Agnes Kalibata, I think actually I would not really need to introduce you, however, to do the honors. President of AGRA Kenya, and AGRA is a farmer-centered, African-led, partnerships-driven institution that is transforming Africa's smallholder farming community from a solidarity struggle to survive to businesses that thrive. I mean, again, punchline from the internet. Agnes will say that, but actually most people will know her because you were the figurehead of the UN Food Systems Summit a year and a half ago now, and we're going to talk about that as well. Next to me is Celso Moretti. He's President Emeritus of Embrapa from Brazil, one of the biggest institutes there. You have a long history in everything that has to do with agriculture, and we're going to talk about you as, let me say, representative of one of the biggest producers on the globe. I'll continue with Natasha Santos from Bayer, and she is the figurehead. She is leading the head of global stakeholder affairs and strategic partnerships as a vice president, and may I say that normally we're neighbors. I can look down on you from Günzburg, but that's completely irrelevant to this discussion. So, last but not least, Ulrich Vestergaard-Knudsen from the OECD. Your head is Deputy Secretary General of the OECD, but your heart is with agriculture, and you've just been to one of the most important meetings of the G7. So let me, and forgive me for using my laptop. Let's kick off with you. How important was the issue of agriculture at the recent meeting of the G7? Can you just give us a sort of a headline, and maybe also why does the OECD engage so much with agriculture?
If we look at this with the eyes of a very high-flying eagle, the whole global agricultural system is basically facing a triple challenge. One, of course, that's the whole purpose. The agricultural sector has to feed a growing world population, very close to 10 billion perhaps in 2015. Of course, that in itself is a colossal challenge. Secondly, we also want the agricultural system to do this in a way that is climate friendly, that is not degrading our environment. That is an even bigger task because actually we're moving in the wrong direction. But then thirdly, something we often forgot, this sector is also a home to millions of farmers, but not also farmers, also other workers all the way down the global supply chain in the agricultural system. They have to be fed as well. They have to make a living from this. To be honest, to face that daunting triple challenge in the decades ahead, that is in all likelihood not going to be possible without innovation, without uptake of digital, without uptake of technology. We have made some studies with the FAO. It shows that we need a 28% productivity rise over the next decade if we are to meet both the zero hunger SDG and the climate change obligations from the Paris Summit. And we're not anywhere near a 28% productivity increase. So that is if you look at the big issues, climate change, livelihood, and feeding this global population, that is where we are. That is the challenge. That is why we need innovation. That is why, to get back to the question, this was very much the center of our own ministerial at the OECD with more than 50 ministers in November, and again at the G7 agricultural meeting in Miyazaki 2 weeks ago. But perhaps more importantly, also at the G20 in India in the middle of next month, because this is by no means a problem for the civilized, for the developed world, but also for the civilizations across the global south, where so many of the poorest people around the planet are dependent on us solving this triple challenge.
Thank you very much, Knut. And Agnes, let me just one moment address you as the former head of the UN Food System Summit. When I watched that, technology did not make the headlines. There were other issues that seemed to be much more important, and the fact that we're talking about food systems was highlighted by that. Why do you think, my impression that of others, is that technology was not so important, and has the focus just been not set correctly?
Good, thank you. Technology is about addressing non-problems, creating solutions to non-problems. The Food Systems Summit was about defining and trying to work together to understand what the problems are that are sitting in our midst when it comes to working with food systems. We did bring around the world, basically, different communities, from science to private sector to youth to innovators, to ensure that the problem is correctly described and understood, so that the problems, the need to be solved with technology can also be understood. So I just give you a few examples. Once we started talking about the challenges and inadequacies of our food system, people started moving ahead with trying to find answers. The earliest solution that I can think about is one of our vice chairs of the scientific group one time called me and says, you know what, given the challenge at hand, University of Wageningen will put all its technologies in the public domain, privately owned by the university, but now we'll put them in the public domain so that institutions around the world that do research that need them to address some of these problems can have access to them. That's just giving you an example. Countries went ahead and started putting in place policies that would respond to some of the problems that have been defined. The scientific group went ahead and created and wrote a huge book that has a whole chapter on technology and technological advances. But more importantly, we did have a lever set aside, what you're calling a lever set aside to address technological issues in the food system. That lever was driven by a number, a whole lot, by different institutions. One of them was the WEF, that is sitting at the center of what we are calling now the fourth industrial revolution. Because of that, they have now what they call technology hubs across the world that are looking at the nexus between all the areas that were described in the food system, and there are many, and how technology can start being part of the solution. Now, as we go into the food system stock tech, which is in July, later in July, we will begin to understand how people have embraced the challenges and the opportunities in the food system and the type of solutions that are being put forward. So technology was at the center, but it was a conversation that needed to be had to be able to define what's broken and how we start tailoring solutions to what the challenges and the opportunities of the food system are.
Thank you so much. And, we're going to go into the African view in a moment. Celso, the company Emtra is again an innovation-driven company that focuses on the generation of knowledge and technology for Brazilian agriculture. And we all know that whatever you do in Brazil is not just for the big home market, but also for America, for Europe. So whatever you do and the pathway that you engage in is important for the world. So could you take us along? How important is innovation and how important is tech within Brazilian agriculture? Because we always get to know the bad aspects. So highlight the positive ones.
Okay. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Delighted to be here today. Thanks for the organizing committee for having me. There is a very interesting story about Brazilian agriculture, which is back in the 70s, Brazil was a food insecure country. We basically imported everything that we consume. We imported beef from Europe. We imported milk from the US, imported beans from Mexico. And because we understood at that time, 1973, and Brapa just turned 50 years old now, that science, technology, and innovation were so important that we made this huge transition of being a food insecure country, and after invested in Embrapa, in of course our partnerships both in the public sector and the private sector, so we partner with different universities, in private companies, we transformed the country in one of the powerhouses in terms of food, fiber, and bioenergy production. We used to say in Brazil that Brazilian agriculture is a science-based tropical agriculture. We were the first country in the world that was able to produce significant amounts of food, fiber, and bioenergy in the tropical belt. And how we did that? Well, we transform poor soils into fertile land. So in the heart of Brazil, we have a biome called Cerrados, which is the Brazilian savanna. And using technology, research and development, we transformed the Cerrados to be, one of the largest areas in Brazil to produce food. We also adopted different crops. So we brought soybean from China, which is original from the Manchurian area in China. And then the Americans took it to the US. And then from the US, we take it to Brazil, in southern Brazil, and through adaptation and breeding, now we are growing soybean close to the equator. We also brought cows from India and cows from the Netherlands, and we adapted to the situation of the tropical land. So a huge transformation in less than 50 years based in science and technology.
We're going to get back to, what tech can do for you and for us. And maybe we can also talk about maybe the new regime, the new air that's breathing from Brazil today, and maybe how we can turn the carbon sink again, how we can get back to the Amazon being a carbon sink. Natasha, Bayer, of course, does not produce food, but it is at the side, or the producers are reliant on your product, on your knowledge. So how much do you rely in your offerings on tech?
Thank you, Connie. I really like this format, by the way. It's really cozy. It feels like we're having a meeting. And everything that Moretti said and what Embrapa did for Brazil really attracted a lot of investment from the private sector. So that's the revolution there in the country. I feel very. Everybody that works in agriculture just completely falls in love with it. Particularly if you work close with the farmers, which is where I wanna get at. So at Bayer Crop Science, we are in the business of, farmers are our customers. Farmers are not, target of aid, or, it's not just for corporate social responsibility. Our whole business depends on developing technologies that really address their pain points. And we have several scientists there thinking every day about what are the pain points that the farmers have in many, many places of the world, which are completely different. Different crops, different systems. Tropical agriculture, temperate agriculture is a completely different solution, tailored solution that you need to present to the farmers. So we are enabling we are, let's say, co-creating actually technology with the farmers, because farmers have basic pain points, meaning they need to manage their farm, they have pest, disease, they have weed pressure, and if they don't manage that, they're not going to be productive, right? First of all. But then they have a set of very complex needs in terms of managing the risk, thinking about low-cost technology, thinking about insurance, thinking about finance, thinking about the weather. They make thousands of decisions every day. We all want to eat, food, and they are feeding the world. But they are the ones that wake up at 5 a.m. and need to see, how the climate is, and going through, if you think about climate change, how they're going to adapt and how they're going to mitigate. So it's a variety of issues. It's a very complex scenario, and we are in the business of developing technologies that will address those and develop services in public-private partnership, in private-private partnership, or directly as a company, services that will address those pain points, number one. But then the second, when we think about combining productivity, profitability, because it's a business, farming is a business, profitability, and then all the environmental outcomes because of resilience and because of reduction of emissions that we want to make farming part of the solutions for climate as well. To address all of that, what we have been doing with the farmers, and I remember a farmer from Germany actually in one of the OECD panels, the farmer said, look, just give me the outcomes, governments, and let me farm with the technology and with the practices that I know. I will help you to get that outcome. And I will tell society how I'm going to get those outcomes. And here I'm talking about, of course, socio-economic outcomes for them, but as well, emission reduction, soil health, water optimization, inputs optimization, doing more with less. They can do all of that. They have the methodology, they can have the knowledge. What we need to help the farmers is, with the technology and with the advice, how we can help society and governments trust on those outcomes, and digital farming come, data analytics come, trust on those outcomes, make it transparent, and then we will really see agriculture as part of the solutions, and we will design technology and policies that will really address pain points and the environmental and social outcomes that society expects from farmers. So we are enablers, we are part of the solution, but we need public and other partners in the private sector as well to really address the complex challenges that farmers have.
Thank you very much. Let's come to somebody who is using technology and observation every day in order to do her job. And Inbal, can you take us along? I think one of the examples that you're going to bring along, and to everybody here in this room, this might sound normal, but when we think about agricultural supply chains, I think to the average citizen, the first time everybody woke up, certainly in Europe, was when the Ukraine war started, and suddenly we saw wheat from Ukraine and a little bit from Russia can't go to Africa, can't come to us. Even some oil was missing on our shelves. So how did you assist and overcome those challenges in production on the Ukraine? Because production is going on.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's great to be here. And so I think maybe I'll step one step back and say, how many people here know that NASA has anything to do with agriculture and how important satellite data are and how they're used. And so I think if you think about it, we've got satellites going around the Earth every day, all the time, collecting a tremendous amount of information on every agricultural field in a lot of different wavelengths and a lot beyond what our own eyes can see. And that can provide us really critical information for a whole host of decisions, a whole host of information. But it can also provide us critically information where we can't get to on the ground. And so, as we are all very well aware, Ukraine is a critical bread basket, an important exporter of wheat, the largest exporter of sunflower oil, as you said, and at the start of the war, you might have gone to the store and all of a sudden couldn't get sunflower oil at all. And so we had a request from the Ukrainian government to say, can you help us monitor what the impact of the war is on our agricultural production? And in particular, in the occupied territories where ground access is not possible. And so I think this is a very good example, and I have a first slide, maybe if we can put that up.
Yes.
That can show what that capability was. And so what we were able to do is, as the season was progressing, to be able to map at a 3-meter resolution the fields across Ukraine, to be able to look at where is the wheat being grown. Remember, the winter wheat is planted before the war. But there was a tremendous amount of uncertainty around how much of that wheat can actually be harvested. And similarly, the spring crops, so those would be primarily the corn, maize, or sunflower, were planted after the war started. And again, there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of different sources saying they weren't going to plant 30% of the spring-summer crops, and like similar numbers on the harvest. And so what we were able to do is use the satellite data. And again, I think part of why this was so helpful was we were working on very closely with the Ukrainian government and being able to respond to what their needs were, to ultimately estimate both how much area was planted, what the production ultimately was, and crucially, to be able to separate out the production between the Ukrainian-controlled territories and the Russian-occupied territories. And so one thing we found is around 23% of the Ukrainian croplands overall were under Russian occupation. Of course, that has been shifting as the front line shifts. But probably one of the most surprising, or two of the most surprising things we found is, one, by and large, most of the spring crops were planted, so around 90%, much higher than what had been expected. And from the wheat side, again, 88% in the occupied territories of the wheat was harvested. And this was a big surprise to everybody, including to us, although when you think about it, farmers are going to farm. They, of course, did harvest their fields. What the satellite data couldn't tell us is where did that wheat end up, right? Who harvested and where did it go? But what that meant is that ultimately when the production numbers came out, they produced a lot more than everybody had expected, whether that was USDA or FAO or IGC or the government itself, where that didn't actually have information. And so we found that around 22% of the harvested production of Ukraine came off of the occupied territories, and 6 million tons more approximately came out of that area. And so this went into, of course, informing the government decisions, became the numbers that were adopted by a lot of other organizations. And I think this is just one example of the importance that this kind of data, in combination with ground data, and when it's led by an end user that needs it and it's done in collaboration, of the types of information that these technologies can provide.
Thank you very much for this visceral example of Earth observation and the role it plays in agriculture. And I think agriculture is probably one of the human activities that is so diversified. I mean, from high tech to really sort of sticking one's hand into the earth all the time. And I remember, Agnes, like 10, 12 years ago at a conference when a weather IT application for mobile phones was introduced in a number of African states. No cost to farmers. Suddenly, of course, the output was incredibly increasing. Those are little steps. What is, as far as tech is concerned, appropriate for African farmers' needs, and again, taking into account that, of course, there is a wide spread of African farmers?
That's a beautiful question. There are a number of reasons why technology becomes extremely important in Africa today, and actually very compelling. One, every household in Africa has at least 2 mobile telephones, and every out of 5 households, probably one has a smartphone. I mean, I was 14 before I saw a telephone, just to give you a sense, because I grew up in the rural area. So by the time I saw a telephone, today every kid is playing with a phone. So that's really something that is becoming extremely useful in terms of being able to communicate. Number 2, we have a very young continent. 77% of Africa are below 35. That makes creates a huge opportunity for people to be able to use the telephone. Number 3, we have huge infrastructure challenges, and being able to leapfrog and overcome some of those challenges comes through technology. So, for example, being able to understand markets and how markets are and how they work is no longer based on where you physically have a market. You can actually have a market and market information coming to you on the telephone and participate in a market without physically being there. But some of the most compelling things that I would say is how it is actually helping overcome the misperceptions we have on how agriculture should work. So, for example, when you talk to people who do big machinery for agriculture, or how we use tractors, the system has always been such that every farmer has to own a tractor. It doesn't work like that in Africa. My land is too small for me to own a tractor, but now we do have... Oh, sorry. all that stuff was not hard. But now we do have an opportunity where you actually can, through an app, you can have one tractor serve hundreds of farmers, and that app helps organize the farmers, be clear what the services are, and be able to deliver these services to them. You don't have to own a tractor or any form of equipment to be able to participate in mechanization. But then to the state as well, we do have institutional challenges. We can't provide extension the way we would love to. The cost and the level of generation of knowledge and staying on top of the pace at which knowledge is being generated. All that is being made easy through technological platforms that allow access to that information, but also through new ways of doing extension that allows farmers to access information. First of all, private extension is in the villages to access information, but also farmers to access information and be able to participate in that. And then you have others where those institutional challenges can also be at levels where they will impact how governments think and how governments deliver services. So, for example, you're working with NASA Harvest on creating this food balance sheet that allows private sector to understand where food is coming in, where stocks need to happen, and which are going to be deficit areas which they need to be selling to. But also governments to just be able to overcome the whole challenge of collecting data village by village and be able to produce a food balance sheet at the end of the season, which a lot of times is also not even right, right? So this ability to have information that can be used to inform people, to let farmers know how much food they'll be having, how much deficit is there in the system, and what they should be preparing to grow next season based on climate information that is coming in as well. That is all stuff that is changing lives at the farm level.
Thank you very much. I would have addressed you anyway, so say whatever you want to say in addition to my question. You were talking about the triple challenge, and we know that tech can be for good, but it can also do the opposite. So how do we find the right pathway? Do we need restrictions? Do we need advice? Do we need more knowledge?
Well, we need all of the above, and I think your question to Agnes and her answer was very pertinent because it shows that there is no one-size-fits-all here, right? Agricultural sectors in Africa, Ukraine, and Germany are not going to need the same digital technologies. So this is also why we say, the OECD, we are not here to pick winners. We're not here to say you should use that technology or that technology. We should do 5 other things. First of all, we should make sure that there is an overall policy framework that is conducive to innovation. That
overall means global? Or?
Well, it means global, yes, if we could get there. A lot of that's quite a challenge for G20 in 4 weeks. Okay. But at least, if not global, then European, then national, then African, continent level. But there has to be a policy framework that is, conducive to innovation. And that is also spurring on competition for digital technologies, but it could also be in the form of public support, just not picking the winners. The second one is that we need to be mindful that we then remove barriers to use of innovation. That could be in terms of lack of skills. Digital technologies can be costly, but there can also sometimes be distrust or mental barriers at the farmers' level to taking up some of these technologies. I mean, I was afraid in Japan 2 weeks ago when we were demonstrated robots and driverless tractors and drones came into the field and all that. I mean, I can understand if there's some farmers who are a little bit reluctant. That's another barrier we need to help remove. Then we should do research programs together. We have something at the OECD we call the Cooperative Research Program, where we bring together researchers, and I think that's pretty important to share knowledge. The last 2 things I'll say is we also have to monitor. That is what we do at the OECD. We monitor sustainability. We monitor productivity, because if we don't monitor, if we don't have data, as you said, Connie, in your question to me, it's very difficult to act if you don't have data, if you don't have the evidence. And 5, the last thing I'm going to say, for now at least, we also need policy advice, as you say. That means we need to collect best practices from around the world, recognizing, of course, that there are different circumstances in different continents, but we need, from data, from best practices, we need to tailor policy advice.
Natasha, you were talking about, and I'm not even quite sure who I want to have first, but all I want to say, ladies and gentlemen, after this round, it's you with a couple of questions. So Natasha, close cooperation with farmers that you've pointed out earlier. How much advice on tech do they really need? How much can you guide them into it, and how much do you have to say, well, old practices, but good practices, we're going to abstain? So I'm quite sure that you're walking a tightrope.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think from my experience with farmers, I would say they're not reluctant to innovation. In the contrary, right? Anything that they can help their farm management, anything that can help their productivity, their profitability, they are eager to learn. What is really hard in farming is how to manage risk. If they need to change a technology or if they need to change practices for whatever reason, it's really risky. It's their livelihoods, big or small. They can be completely out of business, and then it's their generations that are going out of business. And that's the challenge. I think we have, well, if you think about evolving for digital farming, we have the infrastructure challenges that needs public-private partnership, the extension services, the capacity building. This is really important so they understand the technology and the value. But that risk management, the low-cost credit, the insurance, the risk management is the components that we need to work with governments and other private partners. So I would say it is very, and I'll give an example on a country that is very close to my heart, Kenya, and was a collaboration that actually was convened with the support of AGRA. And I visit those village-based advisors. And for me, I'm from Brazil, so we are very used to very large farming sizes. And then seeing how the community and the village-based advisors that were trained, that received more information, they became leaders because farmers trust other farmers. I will present my technology, I'll engage with my company members, but they will trust if other farmers tell them to do. So the power of having village-based advisors that are farmers, that are trained, and then they go to other farmers all over their community, and then they help them to understand the technology. They do the practices with them. They grow the crops with them. They measure and monitor the productivity. That is really transformational from an economic and social point of view, because those village-based advisors will be on the forefront of technology. They will provide for example, a precision application, and they will help those farmers to lower their costs. And then you can see that ripple effect, right? So we provide the technology, we provide the training, we brought other partners. AGRA, in this case, was a convener. But the farmers did that themselves, and they adapted. They took new technology, they adapted new practices, but they need to believe and they need to see the outcome, and we need to support them on the process.
Thank you very much for that. Sergio, you've taken us along the success road that Brazil has had in the past. Now, of course, the world is looking at you also because of your contribution or not to climate challenges. So how do you bring about policies and practices that are aware and counteracting climate change for us all, for the globe, and on the other hand also, as Knut said earlier, also still feeding the farmers?
Feeding the farmers or the world?
No, feeding the farmers in Brazil. I mean, we can't sort of, just put it all on the shoulders of farmers.
Now, I believe that besides science, technology, and innovation, as I mentioned, science-based agriculture in Brazil, one of the big secrets for our development was the creation of good, sound, and very consistent public policies in Brazil. One of them are the low-carbon agriculture plan, where if you are a grower and you adopt one of the technologies for low-carbon agriculture, such as biological fixation, or you use no-till, no-tillage, or integrated crop, livestock, and forestry system in your farm, you go to a bank and you get a lower interest rate on the loan on that bank. So that's a public policy that drives growers for low-carbon agriculture. So this is one of the policies. The other one that Natasha was mentioning about climate risk. So we have a public policy in Brazil called climate risk agricultural zoning. So we develop a databases that all public and private banks in Brazil, if you are a grower and go to a bank to apply for a loan, if you want to plant, let's say, grapes in a specific area of the country in a specific time of the year, they're going to see what is the risk of growing that crop in that area. So this group of public policies are really helping, not only adaptation and mitigation to climate change, but also, making agriculture in Brazil develop even more when you compare, as I mentioned in my first answer, when we were in the position of the 50 years ago. And finally, you mentioned on the new government and the new challenges. So the new government is only 4 months old now.
And all our eyes are on it.
In Brazil, we have 6 million farms. 6 million farms, and 80% are smallholder farmers. So they have, a challenge for social inclusion. Although Brazil, with the amount of food that we produce, we feed around 900 million people in the world, we still have 30 million people starving in Brazil. So that's one of the challenges that we need to face, and I'm pretty much sure that Embrapa will help, solving this problem.
Thank you so much. I'm always very impressed when I see maybe at other conferences the comparison between, for example, how do we know that the Amazon is decreasing, not just by measures of de facto climate change, but also by having Earth observation. You have been involved in another project, actually aligned to a G20 initiative. Could you share that with us?
Sure. So the G20 in 2011 under the French presidency launched 2 initiatives. One is called GeoGlam, very much focused on globally on helping to coordinate and to provide and to advance satellite information for a whole host of really across the agricultural sector. This brings together not only G20 countries, but crucially many African partners, many Asian, many Central American countries. And the other one is called AMIS, hosted at the FAO. And this is very much focused on policy and on the economic side of things. And these were launched together as 2 sister initiatives to work very closely together. And one of the first things we were tasked with on the GeoGlam side, coming from AMIS, was saying, could you provide consensus-driven global estimates of crop conditions across the world on a monthly basis in support of the policy and economics communities. And so that was a very big challenge. It took a long time to evolve and to develop. And again, we had to go a lot of back and forth between our community and how do we present actually very complicated information in a very simple way. And I have another slide on this if we can put that up. And today this is something operational. It started with the G20 countries, so the big production export countries, where we look at what are current crop conditions. Again, if we have the map, I'll be able to show what that looks like. And then the early warning community came and said, well, actually, we have a lot more uncertainty around those countries that are most at risk to food insecurity. And so could we not bring together those organizations and agencies and countries monitoring those countries and help this kind of information to reduce those uncertainties? And so similarly, we now have recently combined both of those, because obviously we have a very interconnected food system. It's very important for us not only to look at the big producer-exporter countries, but very much be also looking at those food insecure countries and having a full picture. And so we do put these out on a monthly basis. And I think a lot of this is also then trickled down into countries. And again, I don't know if we can put that second slide up.
Can we see that slide, please?
Here we go. Okay, so this is coming from our last assessment. And very quickly, you can get a quick picture of what's happening around the world agriculturally. And so anywhere that you have color are the global croplands where agriculture is being grown. Anywhere that's a dark gray means that those are croplands, but they're currently out of season. And then anything that greens means that it's around average. It might be a little bit below or a little bit above. Blue is exceptional. And red or a dark brown means that there's poor conditions or failure. Anywhere that we have a concern, we'll give you an icon very quickly so you can understand which crops are being impacted in those cases. We have other maps that will also show you what those drivers are, whether those are conflict-driven or climatic, drought, flooding, et cetera. And very quickly, you can see, for example, where you might have some concerns. So you see the drought across northern Africa. We've had 5 failed rainy seasons across the Horn of Africa that had very large impacts on that part of the world. We see the contrast actually between Brazil and Argentina, both very large corn and soybean producers, dry conditions in Argentina, and actually very good conditions on the Brazilian side. But just to say, this very quickly provides a lot of very quick information. What we've then been able to do is adapt these kinds of systems actually for being taken up by different countries, largely working in Africa, to be able to use these kinds of tools, but owned and guided and provided at the national scale. Of course, developing the capacities in the countries for running these kinds of systems on their own.
So basically, Brazil has all the exceptional conditions. We look forward to welcoming you in the OECD when we finish accession negotiations.
All the exception in Embrapa.
Okay. we leave those negotiations for when we have our lunch break. Ladies and gentlemen, I made a promise, and I want to keep it at least. Could we have 2 quick interventions? I think we need to hear Joachim van Braun with 1 question or 1 observation maybe, and anybody else? That's fine, thank you very much. So Joachim, would you like to take the microphone? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Connie. The fast-growing subsectors of agriculture are horticulture and livestock production. They happen to be energy intensive. Can the panel talk about the energy issues and solving the energy needs of a modernizing, transforming agriculture in conjunction with the technological issues which you mentioned? Energy.
Thank you very much. Anybody who quickly wants to pick up on that here at the table? Agnes? Yes, it will work. Trust our technician.
I mean, there are 2 things I would like to refer to. Right now, we have a major energy initiative that is a combination of partners that have come together. The Rockefeller Foundation initiated initiative on solar energy that really and rural energy in general that looks at mini grids, but also solar energy. This is beginning to catch on in areas where access to energy has been a major challenge. And you're beginning to see also countries put in place mechanisms like to deal with the challenge of energy, mostly for the need for irrigation. So you see countries like Rwanda, countries like Kenya have started taking on solar energy systems to ensure access to water. It's not yet there in terms of strengthening the horticultural value chain and looking at cold chains that can strengthen the horticultural value chain. I think the energy needs are still huge there, but in terms of securing water, which is very critical for horticulture, you're beginning to see a lot of interest. I think the interesting thing is the fact that people realize that they need to be investing in sustainable energy solutions.
Just a quick comment. Real quick, just to bring the Brazilian perspective into this, livestock in Brazil are produced on grass-fed animals. So the energy demand is lower when you compare to stalled animals. And besides that, our energy matrix is 75% renewable, which put us in a different level in terms of competition to other places.
Thank you very much. I have one enemy, and I think we all have, which is time, certainly time that we have for discussion. All I want to say, it's been really rich, and to attempt to achieve the width of discussions like in a global conference is hardly possible. Let's still do a very quick last round, because I've already seen the red card over there. Very quick last round means in 1 minute max from each of you, what needs to be done from your position in the next 3 years, and how can we especially involve tech, because that is what we're talking about now. There are probably many, many more other solutions, but we're talking about technology now.
Yeah, well, that's a difficult one in 1 minute. But I think we need to remove barriers to uptake of innovation, because I said we're not going to solve these issues. And with the questions that came in here now, climate change, energy, we could also talk about decoupling and disrupted markets for exports of agricultural products. If we bring in all of that, it's pretty clear that we do need innovation, we do need digital technologies if we are to meet all these challenges at the same time. And refraining from promoting specific technologies, we need to make sure we have the right enabling environment. We need the right policies. We need to make sure that people are not afraid of technology. We need to help them when it comes to the cost and the skills that are necessary to apply these technologies. So if we can achieve that, I'm fairly optimistic we can also solve the triple challenge.
Thank you. Inbal, services like yours, of course, are assistance to the policymakers and to farmers in the end. How much more do you think one would need of services like yours?
Tremendous amount more. So I would say we're just starting to scratch the surface of the potential that these kinds of technologies have. They've got to be coupled with enabling environments. They've got to be coupled and grounded on ground data, right, so that we know how to validate and understand the data that we have. We've got to be investing more in smallholder systems in the R&D and understanding how do we monitor those reliably and in a timely way. We've got to be breaking down silos between the research communities and the policy communities and making sure we're communicating and developing the products and information needs that we need. And I'd argue we need there's a big space to leverage these on two other areas, both on the evidence basis for sustainability, right? Today, we keep talking about that. We know that there's a risk involved. We know that there's often a productivity decline involved. How do we understand that? How do we understand on the long term what practices work best where? How do we scale those knowledge? And I think satellite data can play a critical role there. And finally, I would say in rapid response systems. I think today we have a massive gap. We, on our set alone, receive so many requests on whether it's Ukraine or Togo or Somalia or, there's a lot of parts in the world. And I think by coming together through the international communities, understanding where we can leverage each other and provide these kinds of policy-relevant information.
Thank you so much. Natasha, if we talked again in 3 years' time, what would we have solved? What would Bayer have contributed?
I think the fantastic approach would be if we really look at the outcomes that we want on farming, right? We want to reduce emission, we want to reduce environmental footprints, we want to improve soil health, we want to manage landscape management and aspects of biodiversity without dropping productivity and making sure that we are helping farmers to be profitable and that's the livelihoods, as we mentioned. So let's look at the outcomes, and then we will know which technology and which practices will help us to get to that outcome. And we will look at tropical agriculture, we will look at temperate agriculture, we will look at Asia, smallholder, big farmers, and that will be easy to understand which technology and practices. Let the farmers do it, and Bayer will contribute with the services, with the agronomic advisor, and with the technology that will address and help with those outcomes. So let's just focus on outcomes and make farming profitable and farmers happy.
What's the most important thing in your next 3-year plan?
Digital farming. We really need that digital farming is a component of sustainable agriculture in national policies.
Thank you. I've been given another hint, so you have half a minute.
Okay. I believe technology will help to feed the world. We developed a tropical wheat that is being, after the war in Ukraine, that increased wheat production in Brazil. Brazil is going to be self-sufficient in wheat in a couple of years. Of course, sustainability is going to play a huge, important role on the development of agriculture and other solutions. And we'll pick another one, too, actually, digital farming and genome editing. We already added sugarcane, and we are adding tilapia now to increase the production.
Okay, that would actually be the space for another 2 hours discussion, but I'm going to hand over to Agnes.
Thank you.
One more time.
Yeah. I guess for us, the biggest change is going to be that technology and technological advances are anchored in local solutions so that we can create opportunities for the number of youth we have on the ground that actually are looking to be part of something meaningful, number one. Number two, if we can find ways of ensuring that there are financial products that do respond to local context and do encourage young people to be part of an innovative ecosystem, that will be probably the biggest thing that would work for the African continent today.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you to everybody who was here at the round table and everybody who was sitting here in the round and everybody who was watching. I think we've had a lot of food for thought. Now it's the time to feed our bodies if we want to and to feed our intercommunicative capacities by talking to each other. So thank you very much. And I think we have hard working times ahead.
Thank you. Thank you.